It kind of peaked around the yes/no vote last year. Thought that the no vote was going to kind of put a bit of a quash to the welcome to country. And I'm not against welcome to country at all. It's actually beautiful. I think it's something that we can be proud of as Australians, but it's been intentionally pushed and pushed and pushed to the point where it's every single work meeting. I mean, I've been in these work meetings where these things that have actually been pushed through global organisations and then feeding all the way down through to local council.
Dale Holmes, Sky to Earth, the Truther teacher, educator, geopolitical researcher, host of At Sky to Earth podcast, STE Academy facilitator, sovereignty advocate, on a mission to expose the truth behind the global agendas reshaping our world. Dale helps people break out of the programmed matrix through critical thinking, awareness, and spiritual sovereignty. He breaks down the world agenda in plain terms, from digital control grids and technocracy to psychological warfare and the weaponization of identity politics. Dale Holmes is decoding the system from sky to earth.
It's the apathetic country. I kind of think it's been by design, just in the way it's set up. Agenda of like what Maurice Strong said. He was the guy that came out of the Club of Rome. They basically created the whole climate change thing in 1963, I think it was. He spoke about the West being the post-democratic, post-industrialized West, and that is what they were going to be working towards. And that's a 60, 70-year plan. And like there's so much documentation to back that up. But he actually said that they came under the guise that climate change and helping the planet would fit the bill in order to the path of deindustrialization of the West. There's certain events that are more triggering than others. It was very, very triggering for a lot of people, and you can see that in the comments and the way that people are reacting. So my advice would just be like, sit on that if you see this and ask like, who's actually gaining from this division? Was this story even legit? Has there been manipulation in this story, and who would benefit from that?
Welcome to the Ballsy Show, special episode here. Dale Holmes joins me. Dale's the Sky to Earth podcast, former school teacher, passionate with geopolitical landscapes. Thanks for your time, mate.
Thanks, mate. I like that. Thanks for the intro.
Yeah, it's a bit fancy, wasn't it? I thought, what can I call him here? Passionate's one thing. So you're certainly across a few things. Not sure where you're based at the moment, but you're a Victorian boy at heart. We won't talk about St Kilda Footy Club because I know you're a Saints man. Every time we talk, like we did last night, it's always a reference to we were lucky in 2004. But let's deal with the real issues. And it's funny because we've been talking for a few weeks around what the new Channel 7 Footy Show and Carolyn Wilson said about me a few weeks back in terms of being a supporter of anti-Semites and racists. And we both sort of laughed at that at the stage. Can you give us a bit of history as to why this sort of stuff is going on? Because last night, former Port CEO Keith Thomas was brought into it, and I'll get to that shortly.
Well, yeah, as far the history, as around the AFL media, I guess, especially you've seen a mass decline probably in the last several years as social media has grown and grown to the point where you've got people like Trump, who was going on the PBD podcast, and Joe Rogan and such, and kind of skipping the mainstream avenues of getting information out. And we've even seen a theme now in Australia. We've got Anthony Albanese, who's gone on Abby Chatfield's podcast.
Yeah.
So I think in Australia, and particularly in Victoria, yes, the media is dying off, except for probably a bit part of the boomer population. Most of the people are getting their information online and through social media. But I think the football media still has a very big stronghold in Melbourne because football, Australian rules is a cultural institution in Melbourne, and you can see certain agendas and cliques, whether it's coming knowingly from the journalist or not. But there seems to be a theme that permeates through all media, and it's not left out of the football media landscape as well. So I've noticed, like with Carolyn Wilson going back a number of years, and just like predominantly in the football media, going back to even as far as when they had the yes/no vote, not the recent one over The Voice, but the one over the gay marriage.
Yeah.
I don't know when that was. How many years was that? Probably
a long time ago.
10 years or so. And the interesting part about that was the only kind of resistance within the AFL media, because I believe at the time the AFL actually put up a yes over the Dockland Stadium. And that's all cool if you want to go in for a political agenda, if you want to be a political body, but you're a sporting body. And especially something as decisive as a referendum in which there's two votes and a lot of the population is going to go one way or the other, it should be left away from sporting institutions to do so. But at the time, Sam Newman was the one who was providing a bit of resistance, and him and Caro, I guess, have got a bit of a past. And like, for all what you say about Sam, he was someone within the football media that was putting forward a point of view where he didn't really quite care what the public opinion was, and it was swaying a lot then further into kind of like a neo-Marxist agenda that we've seen rolling out in Australia. And so it was interesting, the timing of when Sam and the Footy Show kind of ended. I think it might have been 2018, 2019, which was a year just before the pandemic broke out. And I thought, well, that was quite convenient too, because you wouldn't have wanted to have a voice like Sam Newman and the Footy Show running at that time. But yeah, obviously then, they've engaged in the yes-no vote of the referendum, which again was like a very decisive and polarizing issue in Australia. And we saw a number of like organisations like Qantas and stuff like that going forward with it. And of course, the AFL just seems to always back these kind of left-wing agendas. But then we've seen Caroline Wilson now calling posts you've done anti-Semitic, and this has been another growing theme, particularly around 2018 when it started to gain momentum. I don't know, you're an EPL follower, aren't you?
Yeah, I follow Arsenal. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, what did I say? Tottenham, Arsenal.
Yeah, that's a rival. Don't do that.
Well, actually, I think Tottenham might have been at the fore of it, and they basically, what was happening at the time was there was a every several years there seems to be like something happening in Gaza, and 2018 was the last big one, and that was they called it the March of Great Return. That was happening in Gaza, and it was basically there was people within Palestine that were going up to the wall and just protesting their situation. And I remember it a lot at the time because there was again, as always, like media and stuff being sniped, people getting shot in the back, and so then the EPL, it started kicking up a lot of steam in England, particularly because Jeremy Corbyn was running in the Labour Party, and he'd been very vehemently opposed to the apartheid in Israel. Anyway, I'm going to make this a bit short of just a bit of background. But they started this group, Stop Anti-Semitism, within the EPL. So it dates all the way back to the end of 2018, and then even there was a group in Melbourne called there's a global organisation called the Strong City Summit, and they actually had their 2018 convention in Melbourne. And there was a guy, Tim Holding, which was a former emergency services minister in the Andrews administration, and he was actually a speaker at that event, and they spoke about the rise of neo-Nazis and violent right-wing extremism. So they were pointing this out, and now you're seeing a lot of these stories where and crackdown with hate speech legislation and a number of other incidents that perfectly just happened to fall in line a week or so before hate speech legislation laws are about to come in. And now we're seeing the likes of you. Like, what have you ever said anything?
Oh, mate, to be honest, I had to Google it to work out what it meant. I sort of had an idea, but and for me, if you can go back and check my Twitter feed, it was off the back of supporting RFK's Making Healthier Again, and I think Trump was cleaning out corruption with the US aid that they're supposedly finding in America. So, clearly, that's what I said, and I called it out at the time on my channels to say I think it's really just a different point of view in politics. To say that I think they were what were the words she used? Unusual and weird, but Trump gets in on a majority. So I just thought it was weird. And then I saw last night a former CEO of Port Adelaide, Keith Thomas, and he was my time preceded his in terms of at the club. But you won't meet a nicer, more sensible person. And I'll just play this for you. Just have a listen.
The role that Keith Thomas, the former Port Adelaide CEO, played in this process. Now, it's a cautionary tale, really. Keith Thomas, I still believe, had some backing from the AFL and had a meeting with Stephen Smith and was very much going to be a part of this process. 2 club directors, I'm told, became very nervous about a couple of social media posts a year ago, expressing horror at what was happening in Gaza and, yes, questioning Israel's involvement in the war in the Middle East. But I don't think any more than that. I do not think that I certainly don't think that Keith Thomas is an activist in any way. But Melbourne, these directors were very concerned about these comments coming out, maybe upsetting Melbourne's Jewish community, and Keith Thomas withdrew. I think with the dearth of leadership across clubs, at many clubs at the AFL, or certainly up-and-comers, I really hope this doesn't put Keith Thomas off and
Do you think it will put not Keith off, but other clubs from looking at Keith as a potential CEO?
I don't think so. I can't find the social media posts now. I don't think many people saw them at all.
So they can't find the social media posts.
So this is the bit that sort of, as you say, Dale, this is the bit that sort of pricked my ears, because Keith Thomas is standing both as a Norwood legend. He worked in a radio station nationally in a role with Nova Radio, which is owned by Murdoch's now. He worked at Port Adelaide, and when he stepped in at Port, they were effectively bankrupt. So he rebuilt the club, recently departed, probably 3 or 4 years ago. Life member of the club. You won't meet a person that says a bad word about him, probably because he's too much of a good guy, if you know what I mean. He's a great bloke. And this is all off the back of Paul Guerra, who's the new CEO of Melbourne. I just found the relevancy to this is just, it didn't make sense. So when you effectively said that he's apparently posted some views of effectively, and this was 2 nights in a row, it was mentioned by Carolyn on the 2 Channel 7 footy show she sits on. It was just rehashed, and it was just a case for me. It felt like, we're going to character assassinate you, but then we'll say you're a really good bloke. It didn't even, for me, need to be mentioned. If 2 faceless Melbourne directors didn't name them, then apparently he said this or posted this, but no one can find the posts. It just makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And, yes, you talk whether it's Jewish or Palestinian or whatever, the only reason I knew that Melbourne had connections to Jewish is with Joseph Gutney back in the 2000s. I remember many years ago, he was whether he was going to go to the 2000 grand final, which Melbourne was playing at with Essendon, and he was a high-profile president for Melbourne in that time. So I just found this really unusual. And then when we were talking last night, I was just like, what's this all about?
Yeah, well, I don't know whether he did post something, take it down or whatever, but they were kind of implicating that, or Caroline was, that it was nothing too bad. He was just kind of pointing out what's going on over in Israel and Gaza, which is, anyone that looks at what's happening over there, it's absolutely horrific. And if you point out what's going on, you tend to be slandered with this racist title. And I think it's probably one of the worst. They're trying to make it one of the worst things that can be thrown at you at the moment is this anti-Semitism thing. So for her to bring that up with no evidence to back it up, I think it's absolutely sinister. It's like the racist thing, but it's kind of evolved into this new one based on the political climate that's happening globally, where there's a number of protests happening all over the place, and it doesn't really matter what side you pick on this, but
But it was interesting too, though. We saw Damien Hardwick jump to Noah Bolter's, not really defence. In a way he was. He didn't come out and Noah Bolter's owned what he did, and no one says what he did was right. It was horrific, that assault, and obviously he pays the price, both publicly and then obviously his penalty that he's got. But when Jacinta Allen, the Victorian Premier, jumps in, who is Labor, jumps in and Damien Hardwick effectively says you got bigger issues to do. And I found it interesting too that Nick Riewoldt jumped in and said, well, she's been soft on crime. But Carolyn seemed to have an issue with that. But her connections run pretty closely in that Labor Party as well. So it's almost like if you push a different agenda to what the masses or what certain people in media are going to say, then you're going to cop it.
Well, do you want to hear this one? Because I've only just seen this. I don't know when this was posted. Very recent, though. So we know Caroline Wilson's husband is, I was going to say Phil Donahue, but...
No, Peter.
No, Brendan, sorry.
Brendan Dorry. Where'd I get Peter from?
Remember Phil Donahue? He was like the...
I'm trying to work out where I know that name from. Yes.
Also got. Anyway, Brendan Donahue was a former Channel 7 veteran media person, and I don't know how your wife dealt with you having one media person in the house, but Caroline Wilson's they got 2 in the family, and he was basically like a political journalist. But he stepped. I'm not sure if he stepped down or he retired. It was in 2019. He just happened to go over to Dan Andrews, being the manager of media messaging, and look at the media messaging that came out of Victoria in that 4 years, it's I would say going on criminal. But I don't know if you knew this one. It said Dan Andrews. This is a headline: Backroom in the Herald Sun. Backroom Baz. Dan Andrews, social media guru, returns to put libs on edge. So he's apparently returning, or has returned into the Jacinta Allen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And this is interesting. No one wants
run
to.
for the political campaign there, and then obviously you've got Jacinta Allen piping in on what happened to Noah Bolter, and I think Damien Hardwick had a very a response that would come from any Victorian that's lived through there and seen the massive debt that the state's in and the huge number of issues that are going on there.
Not to mention, Dale, the big story on the front page of the Herald Sun around the fact that Dan operated without health advice to do the lockdown, and Jacinta Allen was the only remaining minister in his cabinet. So I just, yeah, it really
this is the
baffles me.
thing, Brian.
It's like,
if we're not beating around the bush here, what happened in Victoria was criminal. I've got this down. I'll put this down deliberately, and this shouldn't be taken lightly. But the definition of terrorism, because this is getting thrown around all the time now too. And an interesting one to go back to the anti-Semitism thing was we had this mosque fire or bombing that happened. I think it was the end of 2024 last year. And then there was a lot of talk that Anthony Albanese wasn't being strong enough on what was happening. And then there's actually an official and public statement from Bibi Netanyahu in Israel and said this must be declared a terrorist attack. And then within a day, it's declared terrorism, right? So they kind of constantly been refining what terrorism is since the Patriot Act in 2001 and, the growing counter-terrorism legislation, which is getting quite frightening to the point now where they're talking about hate speech laws and vilification laws getting up to 5 years in prison in Victoria. But I'll just read this. The definition of terrorism is a systematic use of terror, especially as a means of coercion. Think about that word. And then terror is violent or destructive acts committed by groups in order to intimidate a population or government into granting its demands. Violent or destructive act. Now, would you say the Victorian government was engaging in destructive acts against a population in order to grant their demands? In this case, the vaccine. So I don't know how they can hide away from this, especially stuff with, like what happened in Nuremberg and like an international quota basically coming out to say that you cannot use experimental medication on anyone and especially force coercion into it. And that's been happening in Victoria much before COVID with the no jab, no play and no jab, no pay laws. And I know a number of people that have been affected by that weren't able to put their kids into daycare, but it took that stance. So it's very large to anyone to throw out political opinions when you've got a husband working for, I would say, a criminal government and being in charge of their media campaigns. And this was, do you remember at the time of 2020, it was I Stand With Dan?
yeah.
So was that a Brendan Donahue motto that he
no idea.
came up with? Like, who knows?
Yeah.
I stand with Dan.
But it's interesting too, isn't it? Because I did a recent interview with the guy, Tim Manger, who is a gold and silver guy. You can check him out on Instagram. And he just, something that pricked up what he was saying in terms of investment. So he's into Bitcoin and gold and silver, and he can tell you where we are monetary wise. And that's a separate issue. But what he did say is Aussies just want to be left alone. But it's almost like at the moment, we're not able to have that left alone because you say if you're speaking right-leaning politics or leaning towards Trump, you're called people have accused him of being a rapist. They've accused him of being anti-Semite. Which I think one of the criticisms he is actually supporting of Jewish people, but which baffles me. Then you've also got the welcome to country stuff, which is really topical at the moment, where you've actually got elements of the Indigenous population don't like it anyway, and some do. So that's divisive in a way from even within their own race. You talk about anti-Semite, Israel v. Palestine, you talk about Russia, Ukraine, you talk about China v. America, you talk about America v. Iraq and Saddam Hussein and the weapons of mass destruction. We've constantly seen it, but it just seems to a point that at the moment that it's just a constant divide of trying to divide the people when, let's face it, the culture has changed even while I've been on this earth in 46 years. You used to jump on the fence and go and borrow a cup of milk from your neighbour.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or have you got some bread, or have you got something? And then you return with a carton of milk, not even a glass bottle, a carton before it went to plastic. Now we're at a stage that no one mixes with anyone. And uh, maybe that's the conditioning divide that's supposed to do. Because if you have people divided, then you don't have people, as we saw it through the COVID situation. You had the so-called anti-vaxxers and then the pro people. And really, it did just create this cultural divide where we've never really felt that way as Aussies.
It's yeah, I think you summarised it really well. And like you're a little bit older than me, but I grew up in small towns, and that's how we were raised. We were always just on our bikes riding
Yeah.
around to one,
Get
and
get home by when the sun goes down. You better be home because dinner will be on the table.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's probably it's a number of things. It's definitely fear pushed through the media, and there is an agenda to divide people for obvious reasons that they're easier to control. But I think technology's obviously played a huge contribution in that too, to in isolating people where we've never been more connected. Whereas, like someone like you, I probably would never have met if it wasn't for the internet and technology. So there's great benefits to it, but it's definitely been isolating, and it's also been a problem for the control structure too, because never before have we been able to see a live stream war and picking up and not having to go to the mainstream media. We're seeing things happening on the ground in real time, like things like the trucker combine stuff that was happening in Canberra that I think really inspired a lot of the resistance here in Australia too. So I don't know where the question was going. It was
No,
around.
no, no. That's I'm just talking about the divide.
Yeah.
But
Oh, sorry.
the,
Can we talk about the welcome to country thing too? Because so the recent one.
yeah. So you're obviously a Victorian, and you're pretty close to what's happening over there politically. Whether you're based there at the moment, I'm not sure. But yeah, we saw that. Welcome to country, and you have someone boo. What was your take on what you saw there?
Well, I mean, I got up. If anyone's been following this, we thought it kind of peaked around the yes no vote last year,
Yeah,
in which a lot of people thought that the no vote was going to kind of put a bit of a quash to the welcome to country. And I'm not against welcome to country at all. I actually think it's when it's done right, it's actually beautiful. It's a very
yeah,
good thing, and it's something that we can be proud of as Australians. But it's been intentionally pushed and pushed and pushed to the point where it's every single work meeting. I mean, I've been in these work meetings where it's forced upon you, and like I would even be forced that I had to do it myself, and it's like, and we've seen a lot of these things that have actually been pushed through global organisations and then feeding all the way down through to local council. So it's if you want to enrage the population, you continually force something on it. Where if it happens organically, then people will naturally be for it. So it kind of cumulated uh, to the point now we've gone to Anzac Day, and you've got very raw emotions with people that have got family and past family members that served as veterans. And then I didn't think there was actually anything wrong with the guy's speech. I actually listened to the full 5 minutes. I think
yeah.
it was one of the best welcome to countries I've heard. But just the fact that they've done on Anzac Day, doesn't matter what side you're on, it's going to cause divisiveness, right? But then we see this character, and his name's, I looked him up, Jacob Hersant. Okay, now people might not know this guy, but
So that was the guy that spoke out.
he spoke out. So I've woke up first thing in the morning. I've clicked on social media, and I've seen this guy yelling, "Boo, boo! This is Australia." And if you listen to the full 5 minute clip, he goes on and on and on. It's not just one bit. But the first thing I've noticed, and look, I've studied how they manipulate these media events, and how easy it can be done, and how you can put agent provocateurs within certain situations. And I saw a lot of that during the protest in Melbourne. So in this case, this guy is connected to this group called the Nationalist Socialist Network, and they've been gaining more and more momentum only through the media. No one would know who they were if the media didn't post them every time. And he's the guy who famously did a Hitler salute out the front of, it might have been the Law Courts or Parliament House in Melbourne in front of the media. And this is what led to them actually making a law against doing the salute. So anyway, and he's connected to this guy, Thomas Sewell, and he's been going around at Melbourne. Anytime they kind of need justification for new laws to come out, Thomas Sewell rocks up with his friends against some left-wing protests or whatever, and they go out and do this salute and they stand there. And he's also connected with a guy, Blair Cottrell, who I got to see firsthand because they were doing a lot of protests when I was living in Bendigo in 2013, protesting against a mosque being built. And I saw then that how they would bus in all these left-wing groups. They'd bus in, I think they were called the United Patriots Front, then headed by Blair Cottrell, and they would have these to and fro's, and someone would burn the Australian flag, and it caused a lot of division. But none of these people were actually from our town, and everyone in the town was just getting pissed off that they were bringing this stuff in. So anyway, the point I'm getting to when I heard this was Jacob Hersent, the guy, and you can hear him very clearly right next to the media microphones. And he's yelling out boo, yelling out boo. He's not just somewhere in the crowd. He's right next to the media. And this just justifies further and further division, crackdown on hate speech laws. And of course, the week before we're going into a federal election, we now turn the conversation over to the same old bloody tactic they use every time, just like Antifa comes up every 4 years in the US elections. Now we're talking about race and racism and all this bullshit that really isn't there, that's being manipulated by outside forces, becomes the key topic a week before the election.
So that you're saying effectively what it's used as a distraction. Yeah, because at the moment we've got two guys, and this we'll publish this probably after the election, but you got Albanese and you got Dutton. You got Albanese who runs away from journos, unless it's scripted, won't ask questions. For me, that's not leadership. You want someone to be leading. And then you've got Dutton who refuses to go opposite or call out. The simple way for him to gain some popularity would be the polarizing opposite, to be totally different. But then
if you're Dutton, it's so easy to win this election.
Yeah, but for some reason he's not going to, and people accuse him of Trump-style politics as soon as that rolls out. But effectively, what Trump did is just made himself more appealing to the mum and dad in voter. Yeah. Because you're reducing taxes, you're reducing all this stuff, and whether you like him or not, irrespective, you got to look at the policy. But at the moment, what policy we got? Someone will get extra money on Medicare, and it doesn't seem to be fixing the issue. And I spoke to Gerard Rennick on this podcast in my first ever episode, and he said the biggest issue is around debt. And no one wants to confront the issue that is debt and work out how we actually got to make it affordable, because it's totally unaffordable, whether you're renting, whether you can get a rental, whether you can build. The cost of living has never been high. Every time you go to the grocery store, I remember as a kid, mum would spend $200 and you'd almost have 2 trolleys worth. You spend $200, you haven't got half a trolley nowadays.
We're just seeing the mass deflation of the currency, and going to Trump in America, and the reason why he has so much support, whether you disagree or agree with his policies, he pretty much kept to his word and his policies. And some of the things that people loved, like straight away, was like when Biden came in, he cut the pipeline off straight away. And you cannot have an economy, and you can't have you're never going to bring prices down unless you get the energy under control. And we are being raped in Australia. And if you look at the per capita debt, like I think we hit $1 trillion now in Australia, incomparable to America's $36 trillion. It's about on par, but they seem to be at least making attempts at the start to chip away at that debt, and I believe they will. And we're just going in the complete opposite direction. I don't know if you saw Tucker Carlson's.
I did. About coal.
Yeah, well, no, he was just talking yesterday. He's talking all about Anthony Albanese. He said that Australia is, we've known this for like, there's the greatest mineral resource place in the world. And if you're looking at what creates wealth within a country, just look at Dubai, Kuwait, Doha, all these places over there. And they are just absolutely killing it, where the average person is a millionaire and doesn't pay any taxes. And we think that this can't be possible. And Australians think that we can't turn into Venezuela too. And I'm telling you, like, we are heading down that path on a trajectory that people just do not believe and don't understand. And for a country of this amount of wealth, and this is a problem with the Aboriginal, like this debate over the welcome to country, what should we really be talking about? Because, you can bring black and white together and basically say we're all being screwed here, and we all should be benefiting from this land too. But like Victoria's just become a basket case. I know people recently that have had to sell off their investment properties due to the new taxes that are coming in. And now what are they talking about? Like capital gains taxes?
Unrealized. The thing that we won't talk about, but he certainly won't rule out, is the unrealized capital gains. And then also on your super. And I'm like, well, if that happens, that's the end of the road, because imagine how many people have got an investment property. Um, and if it's an unrealized gain, say you bought it for 500,000 and now obviously through the COVID bubble and the money printing, it might have gone to 1 million. Then
Yeah.
you're going to be effectively taxed on 500,000. You've got to find that cash. Well, not many people have that 30% sitting in a drawer. You've
Yeah.
then obviously got to sell it. How many people have been in a situation you will then have to flood the markets will flood, the prices will come down, even to a stage with your super. So you might be living off a super fund with one of the big super funds, and you're just getting your certain amount of wage out of it per year. But if it's way up, which it would be, because effectively, well, they say super grows 7% a year. Um,
Yeah.
and that's what, don't even count whether the currency's devalued, but people will be up for, self-managed super funds will be up for just because their prices go up. It's just baffling. And then you look at Penny Wong, what she said in the last 48 hours. I've read it, that she still thinks there's time for a treaty, even though Australia voted unanimously not to have one. And whether you agree with it or not, this is not my point. And I take this from when I spoke to Pete Evans on my podcast. He said, if it resonates with you, great. If it doesn't, doesn't. But yeah, I have some concerns where things are going, particularly with all these division tactics, as we touch on, whether it's in sport, whether it's not in sport, whether it's green energy, whether it's coal, whether it's whatever. I don't think we're seeing and hearing the truth from anyone of a leadership perspective.
Well, I just think it's the most horrible choice of two leaders, and more blatantly than we've ever seen before. And I'll give you an example. Just they're talking about the economy, and I brought it back to energy before. And you're never going to grow the economy. You're never going to keep inflation down unless you can provide cheap energy. And we have such an abundance of it here that we can keep it here. We can tariff. We can do all these things, and we can give royalties to the country and the people and the Aboriginal groups as well to make the country better. But what are the two different policies? You've got Labor and Greens that are going on a path of absolute self-suicide, to the point where their zero carbon goals are completely unobtainable. We'll all be dead before they reach zero carbon, um, whatever their goal is. But then you've got Peter Dutton that's talking about, they're going down the path of nuclear. And then the Labor rebut against that is, look how much it's going to cost us 600 million. Well, we've got a shitload of coal and coal power plants. Like that should be, but the thing is, it's all built off this belief system in climate change, and CO2 is bad. So both of them have signed up to that. We're signed on to the Paris Climate Accord. They were at the Rio Summit in '92, Global Earth Summit, all these kind of things. So it doesn't matter which way you go. They're both following that agenda. There is like a couple of the minor parties that are against that, but the two that you're giving at the front on the key thing that's going to help the economy and help the country, they're both the same. So you don't have the choice.
Yeah, and you also too, you talk about Tucker Carlson. I thought you were talking about this, Grab. He effectively goes, well, have we got any, do we make steel here? And he said no, right? So I assume he's correct. I don't know. I don't dig in that close to it. Then he goes, well, okay, but you haven't got any resources, would you? Oh, yeah, you do. You've got the biggest coal mineral storage in the country, effectively in the ground, which will help you make steel, supposedly. And then you go, okay, but what we don't do is we don't do it here. We outsource it to China, then we bring it back at a greater cost. So, yeah, I think it's at a stage where it's interesting here. People are starting to see through it, but I think it still comes back to the people just want to be left alone. And then I think that's why Australia is effectively seeing this now, because we are so lackadaisical, and we're like, she'll be right, mate. Long as I can get a schnitzel parma and a beer, we're all good.
Yeah, it's the apathetic country, and I kind of think it's been by design, just in the way it's set up, and this agenda of like what Maurice Strong said. He was the guy that came out of the Club of Rome and they basically created the whole climate change thing in 1963, I think it was. And he spoke about the West being the post-democratic, post-industrialized West, and that is what they were going to be working towards. And that's a 60, 70-year plan. And like there's so much documentation to back that up. And he actually said that they came under the guise that climate change and helping the planet would fit the bill in order to the path of deindustrialization of the West. And we're seeing it manifest now. We're seeing the end of it. So it's really tough as far as a political solution. I'm a bit of a defeatist as far as politics. I'm just like, I don't think there is going to be a political solution before it kind of
Blows
it
up.
crumbles. We kind of might have to look at it, America, an example. We might have to take a very big fall till you get rid of that apathy of Australia, because I can understand it, because we haven't grown up in a country where we've had to fight for war. Obviously, there was Anzacs and World War II and that, but as far as the actual homeland, we've never had to fight for war. Um, and we've had a very, very high standard of living. I think Jared Rennick talks about in the 60s or 70s, Australia had the cheapest energy cost of any in the world, as it should, because we've got the best resources, and we had a very good standard of living, and it's been an incremental, slow decline. There's actually, like, David Icke, if you ever listen to him, he calls it the totalitarian tiptoe, and he said if you're trying to implement this totalitarian agenda, which people should be able to see that by now, and you're at A and you want to get to Z, that's your end game. You don't go from A to Z, because the noticing of the public over time it becomes too obvious. So you do incrementally go A to B, then to D, then maybe to F, and then a bigger jump. And I think since 2020 that it started making these bigger leaps.
Yeah.
It started, and that's what triggered people, because I think the whole COVID thing was very rushed as far as what they did. I think that was something that they wanted to implement incrementally over time, and they kind of went too quick, and it's caused a mass triggering and awakening of the population. But we still have this apathy now, and they're masters in social engineering. So it was really getting to a point when they had protests in Canberra. I think it was the end of 21, or might have been the start of 22.
Start of 22.
Start of 22, and that was a fever pitch. That was a boiling point. It was just after the vaccine mandate had come in, and some reports are there was close to 1 million in Canberra. I don't know how many, but I was there, and it was unbelievable. I don't think we've never seen anything like that in Australia before. But straight after that, then there was a pullback on a lot of mandates. You didn't have to have the passport and that, and then Aussies will just go back, because at the end of the day, we want to look after our own and our family. We want to get on with life. But that kind of wasn't the end of it. We're seeing a more stealth agenda now through financial suffocation. That's, again, it's getting to the point where it's starting to get a little bit quicker. But Tucker was talking about it yesterday too, and he's like, if you wanted to take over Australia and you're China, you've got a continent, a massive continent. You've got a country that's supported militarily by the US. Would you do it that way, or would you do it by stealth? And it does appear, whether it's China or someone else, but these politicians have been bought off and they've sold the country out and you don't need to theorize on a conspiracy about that. You can just look at the legislation that is passed and some of the laws, and you're like, how are we giving this stuff away? How are you raping Australians to help multinational corporations and foreign countries?
Yeah.
It can only be done. You can only think that they're not working for Australia, they're working for someone else.
Yeah, and I've heard Jared Rennick talk about it before. There was someone caught in Canberra, a federal bureaucrat, who was caught actually working for China, yet it hasn't been revealed publicly by the government.
Well, that's what he was grilling.
Weird.
That Burgess guy, the head of ASIO.
Yeah, in the Senate hearings.
And he was basically saying, we're not law enforcement. We can't do anything about that. They're only intelligence gathering. So, okay, what's the Australian Federal Police doing? Right? I think, and that's what Rennick's position was, that I think the Australian people have a right to know which politician has sold out their country. And I don't know if anyone knows the word for that. It's actually called treason. That's a death penalty in a lot of countries. I don't know.
Yeah.
We don't have the death penalty here, but that's treason. It's very suspect on a lot of the stuff that Dan Andrews, like, he sold off the ports in Melbourne and stuff like that. There was all these deals with China. Like
Darwin Port's been owned by China. Yeah.
Yeah.
And while it doesn't sit in Adelaide, the Adelaide Advertiser or the Herald Sun or the Courier Mail or whatever, if you don't see it, you don't believe it, do you, really?
Yeah. And I mean, it goes, this is what they did. They created this thing called globalization, which was such a beautiful thing. And if, everyone's just moving trade all around the world, and they brought up, free trade agreements and all this kind of thing. But then we saw in COVID what can happen when countries are isolated and you don't produce your own material. Like, what do we produce in Australia?
Yeah.
There's not. Apparently, we have our strategic oil reserves, and I saw this brought up in the Senate too. So America's obviously got their strategic oil reserves in America. You'd think, if there was some devastating event, you would want your oil reserves in your own country. Apparently, ours is in Singapore. in foreign countries. So we've got a strategic oil reserve, but it's not here.
I know our gold's in London.
Wow, yeah, what's left of it? Yeah, well, yeah, it's a crazy world. It's a crazy world, but
So I think the biggest bit here is the lesson for people is it's cut the divide, isn't it? Because I think if you talk about, if there's so many different versions of world wars going on at the moment. We're obviously seeing what's happening between Israel, Palestine. You're seeing what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, and they're saying that there might be an allegiance between China and Russia, and the US might need to join up with India, or all this sort of stuff. It just seems as if the biggest way to as you say, death by a thousand cuts in terms of to infiltrating a country. But if you actually quit the divide and don't buy into all the agendas and love thy neighbour, so to speak, then that will pretty well put an end to this pretty quickly, instead of getting emotional roller coaster of here we are, we're not, yes we're no, yes we're not. As you say, we saw that through the COVID situation on a lesser example.
Yeah, and well, I think if you're just looking online, especially like this recent stuff that happened around Anzac Day, and you can see there's certain events that are more triggering than others, and this it was very, very triggering for a lot of people, and you can see that in the comments and the way that people are reacting. So my advice would just be like sit on that if you see this, and ask like who's actually gaining from this division. Was this story even legit? Has there been manipulation in this story, and who would benefit from that? Because I think the divide that they've created between the indigenous population and the rest of us is disgusting. I think it's got worse and worse over time. The more and more the media kinds to highlight it, they keep going, stop racism, stop, talk about it, all these kind of things, and it seems to just continually make the problem worse. And I think in the AFL actually originally done a really good job, and they were kind of pioneers within stop it. Like, what was the one with Monkhurst and Michael Long? That was like a very big movement.
And Nicky Widmer at Victoria Park.
Nicky Widmer. And then I also remember watching an open mic with Chris Lewis. I don't know if you ever saw that one.
Yeah.
And like some of the stuff that that he was subject to back then was disgusting.
Horrific. Yeah,
disgusting. We couldn't even imagine that in 2025 that occurred. And like, I mean, I don't know, it was a different time, but there's no time where that was right. So like they've come a long way as far as the AFL actually being pioneers in stopping a lot of this stuff. But then it got to the point where like there was one the other week with who was it? It was the Port Adelaide guy, Alir. He went up there, and it was it was almost like they wanted it to be a racism thing.
But this is
but
the
it
thing.
wasn't.
No. And I called the game for 5AA. I commentated that, and I was just like, well, the kid threw a pamphlet. And then his grandpa gets on Melbourne 3AW radio and then says, oh, yeah, he wasn't racist and he's only 13. Oh, no, he's 16. And then it was all like, hang on, this kid clearly did it wrong. I think Alir called out and said, not cool, man. And the issue is there. But this kid has been banned for 2 years.
That's insane. Well, the thing, I heard Alir speak, I'm sure you did too. I heard Alir, they asked, and like he wasn't making a big deal about it. No. He's like, I just turned to him, said, mate, that's not on. And that probably should have been the end of it. And you could have banned him for a few weeks. So, but you can, like, it's a kid. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But my point was, when it happened, the commentators were on the TV. They're like, oh no. Do you know what I mean? Because just because the guy's black, they're thinking, oh, this. But the media loved that. They would have been talking about that for the next 2 months, and there would have been new campaigns, and we've got to stop the hate and all that. Do you know what I mean? It just furthers into the divide. The more you just make it about, Alir was like, schooled the guy, said, shut the hell up, don't be an idiot. That's it.
And let's face it, everyone's made mistakes. Everyone said stupid things over the journey, whether it's in a public forum on social media or not. You shouldn't be getting a life sentence for it. And genuinely, if you apologise and you learn from your mistakes, no one's perfect. And this is the bit too, if you go back to that Anzac Day sledge. So I saw some vision of a digger talking about a military man talking to the journo from, I think it was 9. Yeah. And it was effectively saying, hey, I don't believe there should be. This is my opinion. I don't believe, and I've got a lot of friends who aren't going to be here today because they don't believe a welcome to country is appropriate at Anzac Day. And it was just the journo was having nothing on it. But clearly, the journo is in the situation where I've witnessed it. And when I was working in a newsroom, it's like, here's the story, go get the grabs, ask the questions, and that's your angle. And yeah, we're now not seeing that two sides of the story. And I revealed that on my podcast in a latest chat with Rebecca Barnett, where I talked about my experiences in the newsroom around COVID information and nurses whistleblowing, but none of that getting out. So yeah, it's a case of information and stories being manipulated for that gotcha moment or that click headline. Because really, yeah, I thought what that military man and Anzac, well, I'm not sure what his army or whatever, but what he was, he's dressed up with his in uniform, and obviously he had his medals as well. I thought he made a really interesting point, whether you accept it or whether you agree with it. If you don't like it, dismiss it. If you embrace it, then that's great. I thought he made that interesting point that is often lost with a discussion. We're losing the fact that people can actually have a discussion on various issues, whether you're right-leaning or left-leaning or woke, anti-woke, pro-welcome to country, anti-welcome to country. We're losing that. So it's the stage that if you don't fit the majority agenda, you're deemed we've talked before, racist, anti-Semite, bigot, freaking whatever it is. Everyone has a branding.
And yeah, and throwing in the neo N word, which is
yeah, which is now illegal in Victoria to do us. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Well, I mean, and I'll tell you another one how I think this is kind of coordinated too, because I said in 2018 that they ran this Strong City Summit, and this was actually, it came out, it was about a year after, how long we got? A little bit?
Keep talking, mate. You love the stuff. Keep talking. Every time you talk, I learn.
Okay.
So keep going.
So, well, I mean, there's a number of these think tanks. There's the Smart City, Smart Suburbs. There was another one, but they had this Strong City Summit, and Melbourne's signed up to that. But so in 2018 they had that summit, and I brought up that they brought about the rise of populism, the rise of right-wing extremism, and around the time that was when the Cambridge Analytica stuff was coming out, that this was a right-wing group. I think that was through the Heritage Foundation, that they were messing with algorithms and stuff online to help promote Trump and get in, as well as helping Brexit. So then fast forward to 2020 or 2021, and we had the CMFEU riots at the front, where they were the members were attempting to negotiate with John Sedka over the vaccine mandate, and this was right at the peak of it. John Sedka then goes in, does a radio interview while the negotiations are supposed to be taking place, and the people are waiting out the front. And people don't remember why this riot broke out at the front of CMFEU. And it was that they were listening to John Sedka, and he was on the ABC radio, and stated that the people that were anti-vaxxers were neo-Nazis and right-wing extremists, literally singing from the songbook that we're seeing now, and the Strong City Summit.
That's against the people paying for his salary, who are the members.
But I'm just saying, like, I don't know, but it seems to me there's this little line over here, and you can throw this out as a last-ditch effort to criticize anyone that has any valid concerns. And obviously they blew up, because to call your members right-wing extremists because they don't want to be forced into taking an experimental vaccine to keep their job, like it's nut job sort of stuff, So it just shows that it kind of doesn't hold much value anymore. And I think, and this is what they're doing to anti-Semitism, is the more that they talk about it, they're kind of like creating more and more of it, because it's a throwaway line that doesn't really mean anything anymore. So I think like the overall thing is, I think it will continue to rise while global politics in the Middle East, if it worsens, it's going to worse here. So we'll have to see.
Yeah,
but the scary part for us is the freedom of speech and the counterterrorism legislation, and how they can use that to control the other populations, right, in the Western world. That's not even happening in the Middle East. So
yeah, and that's where your vote comes important, doesn't it? Are you voting for someone who has those like-minded things, or someone who's going to, like there was many years ago with the GFC? I think they handed out $900 for each person to spend.
Oh, I remember that.
And in South Australia, I was involved in a hotel. The pokey revenue went through the roof for that month. Like,
Yeah, didn't they call it the white goods stimulus check or
yeah,
whatever?
yeah. So the people of Harvey Norman's or Bunnings or home improvements, or even some people might have. Then there was another portion who actually kept it and just paid off their credit card. So it didn't create any extra stimulus. So yeah, it's an interesting one. While we sit back and right now overseas, you're seeing they're looking at, and they're publicly coming out that we're trying to reduce the sun by spraying in the skies and all sorts of stuff to reduce, for green.
They
But
rehash that story every few years, but this one, like this, got a lot of momentum in the mainstream. It was the old Mr. Burns trying to block out Springfield.
yeah, it's baffling at the moment. Yeah, but we originally started out here, it just baffled me that a former port CEO can be a post that no one can find. Is effectively forced to step out of the Melbourne running for the CEO, and he would have been a really good choice. But because of so-called things he said, but no one can track that down, and two faceless board members had issue with it. It just doesn't pass the sniff test.
I just wonder, like who's had an influence on that and wanted to stop that going ahead, to try and to dig that far deep into someone's post to find they've posted something about peace in the Middle East or something, or whatever they posted. But
isn't preventing death a good thing, no matter which side of the argument you sit on?
Well, there's the other thing too, is because we have seen a few examples of free speech in Australia in the last several years, and it's a lot of it comes out of this group called the Anti-Defamation Commission, which spends a lot of their time defaming people and banning people, and they've basically made up blatant lies about certain people that coming to Australia. And then what they do is they advocate to politicians, especially the immigration ministers, to have these people denied a visa. So Candace Owens was the latest, who was denied entry into Australia for her political beliefs. But there was David Icke was denied in 2019, just before the pandemic, and they cited the reasons he was not allowed into Australia was that he could cause an uproar due to his stance on vaccination and climate change. And this is probably about 3 months before the pandemic started, and they've started. And I think Dr. Tenpenny was actually denied entry into Australia around the same time too. So anyone that thinks that free speech is alive in Australia, and that a small group based out of Melbourne that can literally write one letter as a lobbyist to a government official and have someone banned is a pretty scary predicament. We're not living under freedom if that's the case, and a small group has the ability to have someone denied entry into Australia.
They haven't got you yet, have they?
Well, I'm Australian. They can't get me yet, so I might.
All right, Dale. Appreciate your time,
sorry,
mate.
I didn't ramble too much.
That's all right. You've touched on a million things. You got the Sky to Earth podcasts. You certainly opened my eyes to a certain version or a certain way of thinking through the geopolitical landscapes that we're seeing, because I tell you what, 4 years ago, I wouldn't have thought about any of this stuff. Now I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. That doesn't make sense. Why is that happening? I think the more inquisitive you can be, the more questions you can ask. And I say you're a why person. Keep asking why. What's going on?
Beautiful. And I was going to say go the Saints for the rest of the year, but we're not looking too good. Maybe if we get the Koning.
You beat us, so we'll leave that out of there.
Yeah. All right. Cheers, mate.
Thanks.